Kharg Island, where 90% of a nation's lifeblood flows through a single island. "25 kilometers off the Iranian coast, a small coral island no more than 8 kilometers long processes 90% of an entire nation's crude oil exports." Kharg Island, what Iranian writer Jalal al-Ahmad poetically called the Orphan Pearl of the Persian Gulf in 1960, represents one of the world's most critical energy choke points and Iran's economic lifeline. This strategic outpost in the Persian Gulf handles approximately 1.3 to 1.6 million barrels of crude oil daily, generating roughly $53 billion in annual government revenue and accounting for 11% of Iran's entire GDP. The island's significance extends far beyond its modest 20 square kilometer area. With the capacity to load 10 supertankers simultaneously and store between 28 and 30 million barrels of crude oil, Kharg serves as the beating heart of Iran's petroleum industry. Its deep-water terminals, capable of handling very large crude carriers, exploit one of the few locations along Iran's otherwise shallow coastline suitable for loading massive oil tankers. Located 483 kilometers northwest of the Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of global oil and gas passes, Kharg occupies a position of outsized importance in global energy security. Yet this industrial powerhouse conceals layers of history dating back millennia. Beneath the modern infrastructure of pipelines, storage tanks, and loading terminals lie the ruins of a 7th-century Christian monastery, described as the largest single document of Christian archaeology in the Persian Gulf region, and an Achaemenid cuneiform inscription from the 6th century BCE. The island's nickname, Forbidden Island, reflects its current reality: access strictly controlled, perimeter guarded by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and a population of just 8,000. 193 people living among the machinery that fuels a nation. No other major oil-producing country relies so heavily on a single export facility, making Kharg simultaneously Iran's greatest strategic asset and its most vulnerable pressure point. Archaeological evidence reveals human occupation of Kharg Island stretching back to the Achaemenid period from 550 to 330 BCE, when the island served as a trading post in the ancient Persian Empire. The discovery of an important cuneiform inscription in 2007 provided tangible evidence of this ancient Persian presence, though the inscription was vandalized in May 2008 amid regional tensions over historical claims. By the 7th century, Christians had established a monastery on the island, leaving behind ruins that would survive into the modern era. The Hudud al-Alam, written around 982 CE, mentioned Kharg as a source for pearls and a key stopover for trading ships traveling between India and Basra. The island's strategic value attracted colonial powers during the age of European expansion. The Portuguese Empire claimed Kharg in 1507, followed by the Dutch East India Company, which established a heavily garrisoned trading post and fort in 1752 to 1753. However, in January 1766, Mr. Muhanna, governor of Bandar Rig, seized the fortress and expelled the Dutch, reasserting Persian control. The British briefly occupied the island in 1837 and again in 1856 during the Anglo-Persian War. But permanent foreign presence never materialized. The 20th century brought a darker chapter when Reza Shah Pahlavi, ruling from 1925 to 1941, repurposed Kharg as a place of exile for political opponents, effectively preventing broader development. The island's transformation began in 1956, when Iran started building oil reservoirs to hold crude piped from the Gaksaran oil field on the mainland. Between November 1958 and December 1959, engineers constructed a 159-kilometer pipeline connecting the island to mainland oil fields. On November 8, 1960, the oil terminal was inaugurated with the capacity to load 100,000 deadweight tonnage tankers, marking the beginning of Kharg's modern incarnation. Chapter 3. the Golden Age under the Shah. During the 1960s, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi initiated a massive development program that would transform Kharg Island from a modest oil loading facility into the world's largest offshore crude oil terminal. Partnering with the American oil company Aramco, Iran invested heavily in expanding the island's infrastructure, recognizing that the deep waters surrounding Kharg offered a rare advantage along Iran's predominantly shallow coastline. The development proceeded rapidly, driven by the Shah's vision of modernizing Iran through petroleum revenues and establishing the country as a major player in global energy markets. By 1975, 3 major oil terminals had been established on the island. The Kharg Terminal, Sea Island Terminal, and Darius Terminal formed an integrated complex capable of handling enormous volumes of crude oil. Additionally, the Kharg Chemical Complex, known as the Chemco Terminal, was built to handle gas exports. The facilities could load 10 supertankers simultaneously, with a maximum capacity of 7 million barrels per day, representing a technological achievement that placed Iran at the forefront of petroleum infrastructure. The island's natural advantages made this expansion possible. Unlike most of Iran's 440-kilometer coastline along the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman, which features shallow waters unsuitable for large vessels, Kharg's location 25 kilometers offshore provided the depth necessary for very large crude carriers. Storage facilities grew to accommodate between 28 and 30 million barrels of crude oil, creating a buffer that allowed Iran to manage export flows efficiently regardless of production fluctuations. The population swelled as workers, technicians, and their families moved to the island to operate and maintain the expanding complex. This golden age represented the pinnacle of Iran's pre-revolution petroleum industry. Kharg had become not just an oil terminal, but a symbol of Iranian technological prowess and economic ambition, processing the crude that funded the Shah's modernization programs and military expansion. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 brought immediate changes to Kharg Island. Aramco's property was expropriated, and control passed entirely to the new Islamic Republic under the National Iranian Oil Company. But the island's greatest test came on September 22, 1980, when Iraq invaded Iran, beginning an 8-year conflict that would devastate Kharg's infrastructure. Iraqi Air Force bombers targeted the island relentlessly throughout the war, recognizing that destroying Iran's primary oil export facility would cripple the Iranian economy and war effort. The attacks intensified as the conflict progressed, with sophisticated munitions systematically destroying storage tanks, loading terminals, and pipelines. By autumn 1986, the bombing had become so effective that the island was effectively put out of commission, with most terminal facilities destroyed. The Darius oil field, in which the island is situated, was also destroyed by intensive bombing campaigns. Yet Iran demonstrated remarkable adaptability under fire. Despite repeated attacks that would have permanently disabled less critical facilities, Iranian engineers and workers managed to keep some exports flowing throughout the war. Operations shifted partially to smaller facilities at Lifeline Island and Siri Island, dispersing the vulnerability that Kharg's concentration represented. Repairs were conducted between bombing raids, often under dangerous conditions, as maintaining oil revenues became essential to funding Iran's defense. When the war ended in 1988, Kharg Island lay in ruins, its once gleaming terminals reduced to twisted metal and shattered concrete. The reconstruction that followed proved painfully slow. International sanctions limited access to technology, expertise, and replacement parts needed to restore the sophisticated loading systems and storage facilities. Yet gradually, through domestic ingenuity and determination, Iran rebuilt. By 2009, the terminal was exporting 950 million barrels annually, demonstrating that Kharg had survived its greatest challenge. Chapter 5: Strategic Lifeline in a Contested Region. Today, Kharg Island operates as Iran's indispensable economic lifeline, processing approximately 90% of the country's crude oil exports despite decades of international sanctions and regional tensions. The island's current export volume of 1.3 to 1.6 million barrels per day flows primarily to China, Iran's largest customer, representing roughly 3 to 4% of global oil supply. This concentration of infrastructure creates both strategic value and profound vulnerability for Iran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps maintains heavy security around the island, earning it the nickname Forbidden Island among Iranians and foreigners alike. Access is strictly controlled, with only authorized personnel permitted to visit or work on the island. This security reflects the stark reality that no other major oil-producing country relies so heavily on a single export facility, making Kharg a potential pressure point in any conflict involving Iran. In 2025, Iran added 2 million barrels to storage capacity by rehabilitating tanks 25 and 26, demonstrating ongoing investment despite sanctions. The island's location, 483 kilometers northwest of the Strait of Hormuz, places it at the intersection of global energy security and regional geopolitics. Any disruption at Kharg could affect worldwide oil prices and supply chains, giving the facility importance far beyond Iran's borders. Military analysts and energy experts regularly assess Kharg's vulnerability to airstrikes, missile attacks, or naval blockades, making it a constant factor in Middle Eastern strategic calculations. Yet, beneath the industrial machinery and military presence, the ancient ruins remain. The Christian monastery, the Achaemenid inscription, and archaeological evidence of millennia of human habitation remind visitors that Kharg's story extends far beyond petroleum. The island that once supplied pearls to medieval traders and served as a colonial trading post now supplies the crude oil that powers modern civilization, its orphan pearl status transformed into something far more valuable and far more contested. When the Iran-Iraq War ended in August 1988, Kharg Island lay in ruins. 8 years of relentless Iraqi airstrikes had destroyed most of the terminal facilities that once made it the world's largest offshore crude oil terminal. The Darius oil field, in which the island sits, had been devastated by intensive bombing. Storage tanks were punctured, loading platforms damaged, and pipelines ruptured. The island that had been put out of commission in autumn 1986 faced an uncertain future. Iran confronted a massive reconstruction task with severely limited resources. International sanctions imposed during and after the war restricted access to Western technology and expertise that had built the original facilities. The partnership with American company Amoco, which had transformed Kharg in the 1960s, was long gone, its property expropriated after the 1979 revolution. Iranian engineers and technicians had to rely on domestic capabilities and whatever equipment could be sourced from willing partners. Progress was painfully slow. Repair work proceeded in stages, prioritizing the most critical infrastructure first. The National Iranian Oil Company, now fully in control of operations, focused on restoring basic export capacity rather than returning to pre-war levels immediately. During the war, Iran had shifted some operations to smaller facilities at Lavan Island and Siri Island, but these could never replace Kharg's strategic importance. Despite the challenges, Iran demonstrated remarkable determination. By 2009, more than 2 decades after the war's end, Kharg terminal was exporting 950 million barrels of crude oil annually. The reconstruction showcased Iranian resilience and the island's indispensable role in the national economy. No matter the cost or difficulty, Abandoning Kharg was never an option for a nation dependent on oil revenue for government funding and economic survival. Chapter 7: Geography of Vulnerability. Strategic analysts studying Kharg Island confront a paradox that defines Iran's energy infrastructure. The island's greatest strength is simultaneously its most critical weakness. Located just 25 kilometers from the Iranian mainland and 483 kilometers northwest of the Strait of Hormuz, Kharg occupies a position of both accessibility and exposure. The island's dimensions, approximately 8 kilometers long and 4 to 5 kilometers wide, covering roughly 20 square kilometers, make it a compact target. Unlike dispersed infrastructure spread across a large area, Kharg concentrates Iran's oil export capability in a single, identifiable location. This concentration allows for efficient operations, but creates what military planners call a single point of failure. The deep waters surrounding Kharg, which enable it to load very large crude carriers that cannot access Iran's shallow coastal ports, also make it accessible to naval forces. During the Iran-Iraq War, Iraqi aircraft repeatedly struck the island despite Iranian air defenses. The terminal's capacity to load 10 supertankers simultaneously, with storage facilities holding 28 to 30 million barrels of crude oil, represents an enormous concentration of valuable and flammable material. Geopolitical experts recognize that any major military conflict involving Iran would likely target Kharg Island early. The island handles approximately 1.3 to 1.6 million barrels per day as of 2024, generating roughly $53 billion in annual revenue for the Iranian government, representing about 11% of Iran's GDP. Disruption of these exports would immediately impact Iran's economy and global oil markets. This vulnerability explains why the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps maintains such heavy security on the island, earning it the nickname Forbidden Island. Access is strictly controlled, and the island remains one of Iran's most heavily defended installations. Kharg Island occupies a unique place in Iranian cultural consciousness and regional politics. Writer Jalal al-Ahmad's 1960 description of Kharg as the orphan pearl of the Persian Gulf captured the island before its industrial transformation, a poetic image that still resonates with Iranians who remember its pre-development beauty. The nickname Forbidden Island, reflecting its restricted access and military presence, has created an aura of mystery around a place few Iranians can visit. For the Iranian public, Kharg represents contradictory meanings. It symbolizes national pride in energy independence and technological achievement, demonstrating Iran's ability to maintain world-class infrastructure despite decades of international sanctions. The island's survival through the Iran-Iraq War embodies national resilience. Yet it also represents economic vulnerability, with 90% of oil exports flowing through a single, exposed facility. The island became embroiled in the Persian Gulf naming dispute when an important Achaemenid cuneiform inscription was discovered there in 2007. Linguist Habib Borhian and other experts cited this inscription as evidence, confirming the Persian name for the Persian Gulf, adding archaeological weight to a contentious political issue. In May 2008, this inscription was vandalized, highlighting how even ancient historical artifacts on Kharg become flashpoints in regional disputes. The island has appeared in popular culture, featuring in the Sega Genesis flight simulator F-15 Strike Eagle II, where it serves as a target in military scenarios. This representation in entertainment media reflects Kharg's status as a recognized strategic asset in global consciousness. International media coverage of Kharg typically focuses on sanctions, oil exports, and potential military conflicts. The island regularly appears in discussions about energy security, with analysts monitoring export volumes as indicators of sanction effectiveness and Iranian economic health. Chapter 9. Lessons in Concentration Risk. The long-term consequences of Kharg Island's development offer important lessons about infrastructure planning and economic vulnerability. No other major oil-producing country relies so heavily on a single export facility for such a large percentage of its petroleum. Revenue. Saudi Arabia, by contrast, distributes its export capacity across multiple terminals on both the Persian Gulf and Red Sea coasts. The United Arab Emirates maintains several major export points. Iran's concentration of 90% of crude oil exports through Kharg creates systemic risk that decades of sanctions and conflict have only reinforced. This concentration emerged from geographical necessity. Most of Iran's Persian Gulf coastline features shallow waters unsuitable for large tankers. Kharg's deepwater location made it the logical choice for development in the 1960s. Once massive infrastructure investments were made, including the 159-kilometer pipeline from the Gaksaran oil field completed between November 1958 and December 1959. The island became locked in as the primary export route. International sanctions have paradoxically reinforced this dependence. Restrictions on technology and investment have made it difficult for Iran to develop alternative export infrastructure. The 2025 rehabilitation of storage tanks, 25 and 26, adding 2 million barrels to capacity, represents the type of incremental improvement Iran can manage, rather than the development of new facilities elsewhere. The island's importance to global energy markets extends beyond Iran's borders. When international tensions rise, oil markets react to threats against Kharg, with prices fluctuating based on perceived risks to Iranian exports. China, as Iran's primary oil customer, has particular interest in Kharg's continued operation. The island thus serves as a pressure point in international relations, its vulnerability giving leverage to Iran's adversaries, while its importance ensures Iranian defensive commitment. Kharg Island's legacy encompasses layers of history spanning millennia, from ancient Persian settlement to modern energy infrastructure. The Achaemenid cuneiform inscription discovered in 2007 connects the island to empires that ruled 500 years ago. The ruins of a Christian monastery, possibly dating to the 7th century and described as the largest single document of Christian archaeology in the Persian Gulf region, preserve evidence of religious communities that thrived when Kharg was mentioned in the Hudud al-Alam around 982 CE as a source for pearls. Portuguese claims from 1507, Dutch fortifications built in 1752 and seized by Mir Muhanna in January 1766, and British occupations in 1837 and 1856 during the Anglo-Persian War all left their marks. This archaeological wealth exists alongside industrial facilities that define modern Iran's economy. The population of 8,193 people recorded in the 2016 census lives among oil tanks and loading platforms, their community sustained by the same industry that restricts access to their island home. Looking forward, Kharg Island faces an uncertain future shaped by geopolitical tensions, climate change, and the global energy transition. Iran's continued reliance on fossil fuel exports conflicts with worldwide movements toward renewable energy, though oil demand remains strong enough to ensure Kharg's importance for decades. The island's maximum loading capacity of 7 million barrels per day far exceeds current export volumes of 1.3 to 1.6 million barrels daily, suggesting room for expansion if sanctions ease. Yet the fundamental vulnerability remains. Any future conflict in the Persian Gulf region would likely target this concentration of critical infrastructure. Kharg Island endures as both testament to Iranian engineering achievement and reminder of the risks inherent in economic dependence on a single, exposed facility. The Orphan pearl of the Persian Gulf continues its transformation, ancient history and modern industry coexisting on 20 square kilometers of coral island.